Thomas Midgley Jr., that motherfucker was crazy, dude. Born May 18th, 1889 in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. His father was an inventor. His grandfather was an inventor. His father worked for a tire manufacturing company where he made new designs for tires. But his grandfather became really wealthy off of like inventing some kind of saw, improving tools and shit. And so this motherfucker went to Cornell University for mechanical engineering. Then when he got out, he worked at General Motors. And his first job was to solve engine knocking in cars. So December 3rd, 1921, he invented tetraethyl lead, and they named it ethyl, probably because ethyl alcohol, and they mentioned nothing about lead because everyone knew lead was bad. But in 1923, the top three finishers of the Indy 500 were using lead gas. So the demand for lead gas went out of the roof, and he went to New Jersey and opened up the factory so he could handle the demand. But the first 2 months, dozens of people were sick with hallucinations, like brain and nerve damage. 5 people actually died. Scientists were trying to stop tetraethyl back then, and they said it was dangerous. Like everybody knew it was dangerous. In 1786, Ben Franklin said lead had been used for far too long and was known to be toxic to man. Like he said a lot more than that, but he said it was horrible and we need to quit using it. And 150 years later, like, what the fuck are we doing? We were fucking running around with lead-based gas. So most 1923, like, because of the ethyl gas and being around the plant, Thomas went to Florida so he could rehab. He didn't want any part of being around anything that he had anything to do with because he knew it was killing him. And he was rehabbing from lead poisoning there. And lead mimics calcium in the body, which means like there's no real efficient way to get rid of it. It stores in your bones for years and continuously poisons long after exposure. Like it's bad for you. Even in small trace amounts, lead is bad for you. In 1924, Thomas held a press conference because everyone was like skeptical about lead. Like, oh man, it's bad for you. Where have you been? He held this press conference and he poured tetraethyl lead into his hands and inhaled it for a full minute and claimed he could do it every single day without harm. But it was killing him, dude. Like he wasn't. So like, of course, everyone's like, yeah, we're gonna go on with lead. So when he came back after rehab, though, after he was in Florida and did his press conference, he was tasked to figure out a way to make refrigeration safe because the chemicals they were using at the time were either toxic or they were flammable, and it was just not good. So in 1928, he figured out a way to do it. He figured out Freon, the CFCs, and he claimed that it was safe and non-toxic and non-flammable. So in 1930, the American Chemical Society, he held a press conference again, and he inhaled Freon into his lungs and held it for a full minute. And then there was a candle burning, and he blew the candle out with the Freon that he held in his lungs so that people would know it was safe for humans and it wasn't flammable. Freon was used in refrigeration systems, all sorts of air conditioners, billions and billions of aerosol cans all around the world. Freon's crazy too. Later on in life, he said he came down with polio and he lost the use of his legs. So he invented this machine that had like these ropes and pulleys and shit, and it would help him out of bed and get into his wheelchair. Well, in 1944, that machine fucking killed him. I don't even know if I believe that he had polio because lead poisoning fucking makes you lose your nervous system and makes your legs, you can't feel them, you can't feel your hands and shit like that. It starts eating your brain up. Like, it's crazy. Lead gas was attributed to hundreds, millions of deaths, and we're still seeing deaths from it today. It is linked to mental problems. It has lowered the planet's IQ, and it has spiked rise in crime levels. Now, Freon is the reason we have a hole in the ozone layer. It allows harmful radiation from the sun, increased risk of cancer, cataract damage, damage to marine life, damage to plant growth in a lot of our ecosystems. So in 1952, Claire Patterson found that the Earth was a billion years older than we originally thought because he was testing meteorites because he couldn't test the Earth because the tectonic plates have already shifted and kind of ruined what we could have tested. So he tested meteorites. And then when he tested Earth, he found that there was this crazy amount of lead. And he's like, what the hell? Like, why is there all this lead? And ethanol company was saying at the time that lead was natural, so it's not bad for human, but we all know lead's toxic. And so he wanted to see like if it was really natural, the lead being there, or if it was not natural. So he started testing the oceans, and he tested the Pacific and the Atlantic, and he went to a depth of like 4 kilometers, and he tested there, and then he tested the surface, and he said like, so if it's natural, it should be pretty much about the same either place. And if it's not natural at the surface, there'll be a lot more lead on top because it's falling. And so when he tested, he found out there was like 10 times the amount of lead on the surface of the ocean that there was like 4 kilometers deep, meaning that it was not natural. Well, so he had to take these tests further and went to Antarctica, and he started taking core samples, and he found that there was a huge spike in the 20th century caused by tetraethyl, of course. So he started testing bones of recently deceased children, and he tested bones of Peruvian and Egyptian mummy bones from like 1600 years ago. And this motherfucker's like, oh, it's probably going to be about 100 times higher because of the way it was in the ocean being 10 times higher. But when he did his research, he found that there was 1,000 times more lead in the children's bones nowadays than there was 1600 years ago. And any microscopic amount is going to fucking kill you. Jeez. So like 1951 to 1980, like if you were born in those times, living in those times, you were a lot more likely to be exposed to lead. Like there's no way around it. And studies show that over 800 million IQ points were lost because of lead. Like, geez, it really does eat your brain. It dumbs you down. Like 1970s to 1990s, there was research, and they saw that there was a steady increase in crime that abruptly stopped. And the chart looks similar to preschool's blood lead levels 20 years before that. And many countries have the same pattern with crime rates from 1970s to 1990s that spiked and then just stopped, like including Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and the US. Like, I'm not saying it's attributed to all the crime in the world, but violence and lead poisoning go hand in hand. Like, and there was a study where they did they did research on the people, and they found that 25% more likely that you have lead in your poisoning in your bones if you're incarcerated. Like, it's just a thing, man. Like, lead is bad for you. Lead killed hundreds of millions of people. Then he put a ozone layer, a hole in our ozone layer, and he got hundreds and millions of more people cancer, gave them cancer. Like, and then he killed himself. Ironic, or is that karma? Hell yeah, barroom banter.